The number one what if in DLLS Mavs podcast history, as voted on by the panel. What if the Dallas Mavericks had re-signed Steve Nash? Bobby Crowley here with Marc Stein, live at the Westgate in Las Vegas. Talking about one of the saddest sports days of my life, Mark. Let's rewind back to summer 2004. Mavs coming off kind of a disappointing first-round loss to the Sacramento Kings with the two Antoines, Dirk Nowitzki, Steve Nash, Michael Finley. The future still felt bright until free agency happened. And 13-year-old me got home from school one day, and my dad said, "Son, sit down. I got some bad news for you." And it was terrible, Mark. I got no other words.
I didn't love it either, and I was just the beat writer.
So can you briefly run down that saga before we talk about what happened if he actually would have stayed?
I wasn't even the beat writer. I was already at ESPN. But basically, the 2004 season was a massive disappointment. 03-04 was a disappointment, a step back. In 03, of course, they go to the conference finals. But in 04, they lose in round one to a very good Sacramento team. Steve Nash took, to me, what I always regard as an unfair amount of criticism for that first-round exit. And the Phoenix Suns came at Steve Nash. They drafted Steve Nash, traded Steve Nash to the Mavericks. They wanted Steve Nash back, and they realized that getting Steve Nash together with Mike D'Antoni, with finishers like Amari Stoudemire and Sean Marion, they had a vision, and they put down right away a 6-year offer that I want to say was $66 million, if I'm remembering this correctly. Mark Cuban was convinced that durability concerns would catch up to Steve Nash. So Mark Cuban set a limit in his head. He was only going to go 4 years, $36 million. So the Suns offer 2 years and $30 million better. The Suns were on Steve Nash's doorstep. Free agency was different back then. This was in the time of, we're going to fly into a city and make a grandiose recruiting pitch. And the Suns did exactly that. Their whole brain trust came to Dallas and put this massive offer on the table. And even me, just as the guy who had covered the whole Nowitzki, Nash, Finley era, I'm like, there's no way Steve Nash, there's no way the Mavericks are going to let this happen and let Steve Nash go and break up Nowitzki, Nash, and Finley. No chance. But the Suns put such a considerable offer on the table, and Mark Cuban didn't want to raise his offer. He wasn't going to yield. And so Steve Nash, I don't think at the time Steve Nash was looking to go, but if you're him, how do you say no to an extra $30 million to go back to the team that drafted you? I mean, easy. It was. I mean, he and Dirk were so close, and the three of them were so close to this day. They are still very close, all three of them. And Dirk and Steve take vacations together. Their families, their children go, like, they love to be together. Like, it was a huge, pre-Luka trade. It was the same kind of thunderbolt shock that
it was terrible, man.
I mean, Don Nelson, just in June, Don Nelson won the Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award from the NBA Coaches Association. And Don Nelson said at the press conference before Game 2 of the NBA Finals, losing Steve Nash, my relationship with Mark Cuban was never the same. And by the end of the next season, Nelly abruptly resigned on a Saturday in March. On a Saturday in March, Don Nelson just...
And that team wasn't bad. That team was top 4 in the West.
So that was... And you remember when the Mavericks acquired Kristaps Porzingis, Mark Cuban told me on the record, I didn't keep Dirk and Nash together. I made that mistake. I'm not going to make it again with Luka and Porzingis.
Oh, well.
Like that, but I think Cuban did Sirius XM radio this past weekend at Summer League and brought up letting Nash go and how he had to, wear the embarrassment of that for years and years and years, because Nash went to Phoenix and went to a new level as a player. He was already excellent, but and there were a lot of factors for that too. But I mean, it was not ideal.
That spring, the following spring, 2005, the Suns knocked out the Mavs in the second round of the playoffs. Now, KP was traded in 2022, and Jalen Brunson actually walked as a free agent in 2022 as well. So history does have a way of repeating itself. But, in my 13-year-old mind, whenever Steve Nash left, I thought, well, this is the end. Like, Dirk is still amazing, but, like, the Mavs are done. They did kind of completely rebuild their team that summer very quickly. They got Devin Harris. They traded for Jason Terry. They rounded out a bunch of – Josh Howard was ready to step up. Marquise Daniels was ready to step up. Jerry Stackhouse comes along. Like, that team is still very good. Of course, the Mavs go to the finals in 2006, and the NBA abruptly canceled the finals mid-series, so it was just completely unresolved. 2007, of course, there was a work stoppage at the end of the year, and so the Mavs, despite winning 67 games, weren't able to win a title either. But a title did eventually come. We had to wait around for a really long time. But for the purpose of this argument, what if the Mavs had re-signed Steve Nash? Do you think that Dirk and Nash and Michael Finley, had they not amnestied him, or maybe they still do, or whatever the case may be, do you think that those guys would have had the goods? Do you think they would have been able to win a title?
Multiple championships. I remain convinced. Obviously, it's an unanswerable question, but there's this popular narrative that drives me crazy every time I hear it.
Dirk grew up. They both grew
Dirk
up.
and Steve had to go their separate ways
to become
the players the players and men that is.
It's Cope. It's great Cope. It is so good.
Do you know how good Steve Nash was? The Mavericks had to immediately acquire Jason Terry to replace him, and then trade to bring back Jason Kidd. Yes, the Mavs won a championship, but they essentially filled the void created by letting Steve Nash go, by bringing in Jason Terry, whose pick-and-roll chemistry with Dirk Nowitzki was off the charts and became a Mavs legend in his own right, and brought back Kidd. That's how you get past a mistake like losing Steve Nash. So when people talk about losing Brunson, even before the Luka trade, which I don't even think we want to go anywhere near that before we really send you and Tanner over the edge. But just losing Brunson, that's the thing. The Mavs let Nash go, but replaced him with Jason Terry and a future Hall of Famer in Jason Kidd. The Mavs have not answered the Brunson departure in those terms, and now they have to move on after a trade that they chose to make themselves. So I think Dirk and Steve led Mavericks team wins at least one championship, probably multiple championships. You also have to remember, so Steve Nash goes to Phoenix, completely changes his physique. I mean, so there was the snub fuel that he took from the way the Mavs didn't believe in him. And that helped take him to another level. But also, and this is a oft overlooked piece of this, the hand-checking rules changed that very summer.
Yep.
Hand-checking was outlawed. So after Steve Nash had just been manhandled and smothered by a very physical, long Doug Christie, who was a really good defender, one of the elite perimeter defenders of his day, Doug Christie wouldn't have even been able to play the same kind of defense he played against Steve Nash in the 04 playoffs in the 04-05 season. So you have the combination of D'Antoni's system, Nash turning his body into a cyclist's body. After if you go back and look in his Dallas days, Steve always kept some bulk on him. He thought he needed that bulk to take the pounding, but he became this just ultra fit, ultra health conscious, changed his diet completely guy. So body, D'Antoni, no hand checking, and suddenly you get a 2-time MVP.
I always kind of think now that 03-04 Mavs team with Antoine Walker, Antoine Jameson, and go on down the line, they had, relatively speaking to the rest of the league, I still believe one of the top 5 offenses of all time, just in terms of like offensive rating compared to the NBA. They were unbelievable. They could not be stopped, but the defense was miserable. That summer, they let Nash go and sign Eric Dampier, and so that just felt like a real misread by me to say we need more size, we need less offense. It did not seem to work out, and I'm glad that you brought up the hand-checking rule because I shudder to think of what a Dirk Nash pick-and-roll offense could have looked like in a new era, which started literally that next year.
Yeah.
Was that rule change a surprise? Like, did teams know that was like whenever the Mavs are doing the calculus?
I wouldn't say surprise, but it wasn't covered and discussed like it would be now. Like, so this is 2004, so we're still 5 years away from Twitter, and even 2009 NBA Twitter is not what it was in by the time LeBron went back to Cleveland. So it's like the discourse on everything today is loud and constant, and I just have to believe in the modern day there would have been a lot more discussion about where. So it's like the hand check stuff was talked about. Everybody knew it was coming, but like you also couldn't have known the impact until we actually saw it. But like all these factors, plus, I mean, Nash and Dirk did have, their pick and roll chemistry was poetry, but I mean, Dirk couldn't do what Amari Stoudemire could do.
Right.
I mean, Marion and Stoudemire lived above the rim. I mean, they were just freakish athletes, and Steve took their games to another level. I mean, it just, so many things just meshed right for the Suns. And look, and that Suns team still didn't win at all. I mean, they, the PHNX what if is like, just, that Suns team.
Don't step on the court.
That Suns team was so good for that 4 or 5 year stretch and just couldn't win. And, people hold that against Steve, which is another ridiculous thing to me. But, like, would he have been a 2-time MVP in Dallas? I don't know. But, like, I would have loved to have seen him play with Dirk in the no hand check era, to see what would happen. And it's like, again, it's an unanswerable question.
Yeah, and if they do re-sign Steve, then there's probably no Nelly resignation, or maybe there still is, but there's probably no Avery Johnson.
Yeah.
There's probably no a lot of the moves that they made. There's definitely no 2011 title because they never trade for Kidd. They never.
And I have to say, Avery Johnson doesn't get enough credit in the reflect when we look back. Dirk Nowitzki will tell you that the switch to Avery and Avery's insistence that Dirk get inside the 3-point line and add things to his game, that made Dirk a much more well-rounded offensive player.
One of the most iconic plays of his career, the tying and one in Game 7 against San Antonio, coached by Avery.
And Spoelstra would always say, if you compare 06 Dirk to 011 Dirk, by 2011, there was nothing you could throw at Dirk Nowitzki defensively that he didn't know, see, and have a counter for. And that Avery Johnson was an important part of that evolution. And another thing, like covering the team at that time, I thought Dirk would be just crushed to lose Steve. But he showed that he was far more able to adapt and deal with change. Again, the pick and roll chemistry he built with Jason Terry. Then they get Kidd, they get Marion, and they have ultimately built a championship team. But like Dirk proved much more adaptable post Nash than I think any of us thought at the time. So look, the story ended up happy because they won one, and it's still the only championship in franchise history. But yeah, I mean that was an unforgettable summer. You and Tanner were not the only sad Maverick souls in those days.
But we pushed through. The Mavs did get a ring. Dirk did get his ring. Maybe you could have had a lot more, but that's what makes this such a fun what if, because the story had a happy ending anyway. But maybe it would have been happier, maybe not. Who knows? The grass ain't always greener, but those guys sure were fun to watch play, man. They were sure fun to watch play.
Changed my career for sure.
Yeah.